So as you can see, this is a much more fascinating topic than you might have guessed. Let's talk more about the state of bike sharing and its future with Dana Yanocha. She's a senior research associate at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Of course, she's here in studio with me. And let's just talk about this question of culture, Dana. It's really fascinating. What do we know about the characteristics of the cultures in which this type of bike sharing program works?
Well, we've seen bike share, dockless bike share, really play out in a variety of locations across the world in the past year. So it really rose quickly to prominence in China, and then sort of spread to Europe and the US, and now we're seeing some systems in Latin America and South America as well. And it seems like the cities in which this has really been successful are ones where the city has been really involved in putting together regulations to really manage the system. It seems like the kind of hands-off free market approach hasn't necessarily worked. And that approach has really let users kind of run wild with these bikes and leave them all over the place and cause some of the concerns that we're seeing you know, from residents, from visitors, from people complaining about clutter and misparked bikes and that sort of thing.
So does that mean if you don't have the resources as a city to police this part of the transportation system, it might not be a good fit for you?
I mean, enforcement is definitely key, and that's something that requires more resources, more boots on the ground, and more resources up front to really think about what the enforcement capabilities are. But enforcement isn't everything. It can really come down to cities creating relationships with these private companies and making sure that the private companies are aligning with the goals of the city as far as you know, building out their existing transportation networks.
But let's face it, there are cities around the world where you have always seen bikes, where there's a culture of bicycling. I think of the Netherlands, I think of China, absolutely. And I just wonder if there are some places where this isn't going to work because culturally people don't want to be on a bicycle, they're not as physically oriented to get to places, or they want to own something and they want that thing to be theirs and not borrowed.
Sure. Yeah, well, I would say that places that we've seen that have, you know, less of sort of a cycling culture are generally places that haven't seen a lot of investment in cycling infrastructure. It's really hard.
Bike lanes.
Yeah, it's really hard to convince people to bike if they're in the middle of traffic.
Sure.
If they don't feel safe, and especially if you think about more casual bike riders who are usually the ones who are going to use bike share. So,
and maybe
you know,
not know the rules of the road.
Exactly.
As well.
You know, and might not be as comfortable riding in the street. So, you know, again, cities that have this infrastructure in place already are kind of a step ahead in developing a culture around this new dockless model.
So, you know, the piece that we just aired in Mexico City talks about sort of, I believe it'll take time for people to get used to the system and that perhaps people weren't prepared for this sort of technology. And it's resulted in bikes being stolen. Is there an acceptable level for these companies that they go in and they know, hey, I'm going to lose 10% of my fleet in the first year? And how do you get them over the hump in terms of making the investment as a city if you're inviting them to come invest?
Yeah, well, vandalism and theft have been a really big problem for bike share in general when we think about traditional docked systems, but for dockless as well. And it's one of the reasons that companies like Mobike and Ofo have cited for why they've pulled out of a variety of US markets. And when we think about vandalism, you know, it really is something that comes down to establishing a system that people want to use, that people want to respect. And if the city's really bought in and these private companies are bought in and it really feels like it's part of the fabric of the city, then it starts, those vandalism and theft numbers kind of start to go down a little bit because it's providing a service that people want and people need.
You also say that people are moving from bicycles to scooters very quickly, and there's an economic motivation for the companies to go that route. Talk to me a little bit about that with the last minute we have left here.
Yeah, it seems like some companies that initially came out providing dockless bikes are now sort of moving into providing these dockless e-scooters. It seems like from an economic standpoint, it may be a little bit cheaper as far as cost recovery. And the scooters do seem to be generating more trips per day than the dockless bikes. So that is generating additional revenue for the companies.
Some safety concerns there as well, obviously.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming in, Dana. That was a fascinating topic. We appreciate your time.